Hi everyone! So in this video I'm going to be showing you how I made this delicious sandwich bread. It's quick, it's easy, it's super soft on the inside, it's flavorful, it's delicious. This recipe doesn't require a bread machine. I did use a stand mixer, but you could do this completely by hand. This recipe is perfect if you're a beginner and you've maybe never made bread before. I'm going to walk you through all the things that might be intimidating, like how to knead bread, how do you know if you've kneaded it enough, how do you know if it's risen enough. I'm going to address all those things in this video. So if you want to know how I made this delicious sandwich bread, then please keep watching. So just a disclaimer, I am no expert chef by any means. This is just a recipe that we found that we like through my own research and trial and error. So this is a recipe that I adapted from Josh Weissman on YouTube. I'll link that recipe and his channel down below. So a lot of people are making bread from scratch in their home now due to the coronavirus, because you don't want to leave your home and go to the grocery store every week just to buy fresh bread. So the reason that we like this bread recipe as opposed to other bread recipes is because other bread recipes are really nice and dense and they have good flavor. And they're nice to eat on their own, like just a plain slice of bread or just with butter or butter and jam. But if you wanted to use the bread as like sandwich bread, as like a vehicle for other foods, such as like a sandwich or a grilled cheese, those breads were often like too dense, too heavy, and too flavorful, where it overwhelmed the flavor of the sandwich or the grilled cheese or whatever you were making. So we like this one because it's got good crust, it's nice and soft on the inside, it's not too dense and heavy, and it's almost flavorless in a sense that, in a good way, that it still has good flavor, but the flavor is not overwhelming if you use it for a sandwich, a grilled cheese, whatever. So here is what you're going to need. You're going to need a stand mixer. I have a KitchenAid stand mixer, and then the dough hook. If you don't have one of these, that's totally fine. You can make this recipe completely by hand. And the beauty of this is a stand mixer helps, but you don't need a bread machine at all. You're going to need 3 cups or 440 grams of bread flour. You could use all-purpose flour, but bread flour has a higher protein content, which gives you better gluten development, which gives you a better texture for your bread. Then you're going to need 1 teaspoon of salt. Then you're going to need a mixture of 3/4 of a cup or 175 grams of warm water, and then 1/2 a cup or 25 grams of warm milk. I'll talk about this more in a second. You're going to need 1 tablespoon or 21 grams of granulated sugar. You're going to need 9 grams or 1 tablespoon of this active dry yeast right here, or they come in packets. You could use 1 packet. What you don't want to use is this instant yeast or rapid rise yeast. You're going to need 3 tablespoons of unsalted softened butter. And then you're going to need 1 small loaf tin. I got this one off Amazon. It's from Rachel Ray. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is take your milk and water mixture and pop it into the microwave for about 30 to 60 seconds, stirring it every 15 seconds. I'm going to measure mine with an instant read thermometer. You want it to reach about 100 to 110 degrees. If you don't have an instant read thermometer, just stick your finger in the milk and water mixture, and it should be roughly the same temperature as your body temperature of 98.6 degrees. So if you stick it in and it's much, much hotter, then you probably got your mixture too hot, which could potentially kill the activation of the yeast. If it's much, much colder, that's fine, but it might just take longer to activate the yeast if it's colder. So here I'm just taking my yeast and sprinkling it over the warmed water and milk mixture. I totally forgot to dissolve the sugar in it first. So you should do that first, stir it around, dissolve it, and then sprinkle in the yeast mixture. But then just stir it all together and let it sit there for about 5 to 10 minutes to let the yeast activate. So in my stand mixer, I've got my 3 cups of bread flour, and then I'm just going to add 1 teaspoon of salt and mix it around. The reason that we don't want to add that salt in with the yeast is because salt can slow down the activation of the yeast. So I'm just going to stir it around until it's well incorporated. So this is what you want your yeast to look like after it's been sitting for about 5 or 10 minutes. It's nice and foamy on top. That's how you know that it's active and it's working, and it will cause the bread to rise, cause good gluten development, all that good stuff. So now you just want to take your yeast mixture and dump it on in. Lower your stand mixer, lock it into place, and start it out on a low speed. You just want all the wet and dry ingredients to be incorporated. And you may need to stop your mixer and scrape down the sides to make sure all the flour has been incorporated. So this is what it should look like when most of the flour has been incorporated. When that's the case, set a timer for 3 minutes and turn your mixture to medium to high speed. So this is what you want. So you can kind of see that dough slapping against the sides of the bowl. That's what we want. The dough hook is pressing into it. This is the machine doing all the kneading for us. So we want it to run on like this for 3 minutes. This is what's developing that good gluten. Sometimes if my mixer's too high, the dough kind of completely comes off the dough hook like this. If that's the case, I just turn it down 1 speed. And then here I turned it down 1 speed, and then the dough goes back on the hook and continues to push against the bowl and knead. So now I'm going to drop in my tablespoons of butter, 1 tablespoon at a time. So if your dough starts to fall apart like this, like mine's kind of coming off the dough hook and slapping against the side, that's good. That's what you want. That's how the butter's going to get incorporated into the dough. Then drop in tablespoon number 2, turn it on until it's well incorporated. And then if you ever have trouble letting your butter incorporate, I turn mine up to a higher speed. That kind of creates more heat and more friction. That helps the butter incorporate a little bit better. And then drop in tablespoon number 3 and keep mixing until it's incorporated. So now you're just going to want to take your dough off the dough hook. This is what it looks like in the stand mixer. And then I've got my clean work surface. I've sprinkled some flour on it. Just plop the dough onto the work surface and sprinkle the top of the dough with some more flour. So as you can see, it's not one cohesive piece. So now we're going to do some hand kneading. And all hand kneading is that we just take the dough and push it out and roll it back on itself, and then do a turn, push the dough out, roll it back on itself, do a turn, push it out, roll it back on itself, do a turn. So I'm going to keep doing this hand kneading until it forms a nice cohesive ball. You just saw me kind of roll the dough around on the flour to make sure it's not sticking to the counter. And you know that you've done this when it's a nice cohesive ball. If you can poke it and the dough springs back, then you've developed enough gluten. So now I just kind of roll the dough on the counter to get a smooth bottom. I've got a clear bowl that I have maybe a half a tablespoon of canola oil, vegetable oil in, and I'm just going to grease the entire bowl because we're going to let our dough sit in that. We don't want it to stick. I've got some oil on my hands. I'm just going to pat the top of the dough so it doesn't dry out. Spread the oil around the bowl, put the excess on the top of the dough, and just plop it into the bowl. Cover it with saran wrap. And we're just going to let this rise at room temperature for about 1 hour until it's doubled in size. And I like these clear bowls so I can see if the dough has doubled in size. All right, so this is what your dough should look like after it's risen for about an hour. I've got my bread tin ready, all greased with butter. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on my clean work surface. Take the saran wrap off my dough, but we do want to keep it because we will use it later, so I just drape it over the side. Give the dough a good punch to deflate the air and turn it out onto my work surface. How you know that your dough has risen when it's got all those bubbles there. So now I'm just going to pat out my dough, flattening it out, pushing out all that air, forming it into a nice rectangle, but I don't want the width to be any longer than my baking tin. So you can see I'm using it there as a reference. It doesn't matter how long it is, but it shouldn't be any wider than your baking tin. Once I feel like it's at a good width and length, I'm going to roll up the dough like such, and then pinch together the seams. So just pinch it together from left to right, pinch together the sides, and then I kind of roll it back and forth to smooth everything out. Once I feel like it's nice and smooth and it's a good size for my loaf pan, I take that seam and we want to plop it in our pan seam side down, and this is what it should look like. And then I'm just going to kind of pat everything out, make sure everything's nice and level, even everything out inside the pan. Now I'm going to take that saran wrap, place it on the table, use a little bit of vegetable oil to grease it, or you can use cooking spray if you have some, and we want to rub that around the saran wrap and then loosely drape it over the dough and let that dough rise one more time inside the pan for about another hour. So this is what the dough should look like after it's risen for about an hour. Mine's a little wonky, but that's okay. So now we're going to carefully remove that saran wrap. That's why we greased it, because we don't want it to tug or pull at the dough to deflate all that air that it has from that second rise. Now just pop it into a 350-degree oven. I'm going to set my timer for 16 minutes and then rotate it halfway through and set it for another 16 minutes. It's going to take about anywhere from 30 to 35 minutes total for this to bake. So now take your bread out of the oven and carefully with your oven mitts, remove it from the pan and set it on a cooling rack and let it cool there. You can tap the bottom of the bread and the top of the bread and it should sound hollow. That's how you know that it's done. And your house just smells so good after this. So here it is. I've let this bread cool off completely. So I'm just gonna slice into it so you can see what the inside looks like. Look at that inside. It's so nice. It's so soft. Do you see how soft it is? It's got great flavor. It's amazing. It smells so good once you cut into it. Do you see how soft that is? But the crust is really nice as well. I also put the bread in these bags when I'm done, just these twist tie bags. They're clear. They come with like the bread ties as well. That's what I put my bread in when I'm storing it. So that's it. It's that simple. So I hope that you can make this recipe at home and enjoy.